Whoa, baby, what a difference a month makes for Democrats. Take a look at the front page of the New York Times 4 weeks ago today. The top story all about how some in the party were worried about President Biden's mental state after the debate with Trump. And here's the New York Times today. I'm going to quote it. Everything is different now for Democrats. Their crowds are dancing. Beyonce has conquered the soundtrack. The celebrities from Southern rappers to Hollywood actors are showing up. The headline of that story sums up the question on everybody's mind. How long can Democrats ride this incredible wave of new energy? Well, this evening, I'm glad to welcome someone who knows the likely nominee, Vice President Harris, very, very well. Democratic Senator Cory Booker of the greatest state in the nation, New Jersey. Senator, it is always good to see you. We have so much to talk about, but I want to start with something pretty serious. I want to get your response, your reaction to what former President Donald Trump said about Vice President Harris's race today at the NABJ event, and really how he's responded since then.
Look, I think that this is a standard playbook for Donald Trump to try to deflect and divide. He brings up things that he knows will be considered outrageous by people on our side of the aisle. And all we want to do now is talk about that. And this is really his ability to deflect from what the real issues of this election are and try to divide our country against itself and opportunistically capitalize on that. Think about this for a second. We are talking about whether a black woman is black. And all these people are rushing to say, oh, she was an AKA and she went to a historically black college. Enough of that. Let's talk about the economy. Let's talk about health care. Donald Trump doesn't want to talk about that. He doesn't want to talk about his ripping away of a woman to control her own body and make her own health care decisions. He doesn't want to talk about the fact that he blew one of the biggest deficits in our budget that we've ever seen in my lifetime, all to give overwhelmingly tax cuts to the wealthiest there are and not middle-class tax cuts the way they could be and as they were under Harris and Biden with the child tax credit. He does not want to talk about the issues. So what does he do? What he's done for his entire times aspiring to get into politics. Talk about birtherism and the outrageous claim that Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States and have us running around talking about that and trying to prove it. Talk about the Central Park Five when he was irrelevant and getting his name into the New York Times. This is what he does. This is supposed to bring our country together for common aspiration and common purpose and really the sense of common cause. He divides us against each other using racial tropes as his tool. I've seen this in the Republican Party too much.
Then do you think this election is going to be, you said the most important issues of the election, you brought up policy, and there's lots of questions. What is Kamala Harris's policy going to be on X or Y? Is this election going to be about policy? Because Donald Trump, to the point you just made, never covers that.
No, and he's going to do his best. And I've seen this playbook. You want to talk about DEI, CRT, whatever letters they can bring up that are about dividing America along racial lines, religious or gender. I want our party, and I know what Kamala Harris wants to talk about, is the economy. Which administration, Trump or Biden-Harris, created more jobs? Which created more manufacturing jobs? Even look at something like the stock market and how corporations and businesses did. In fact, I know this has been more black business new starts as well as overall business entrepreneurial new starts in the last year to 2 years than in any 1 to 2 year period before in the last 25 years. This is an administration under Biden-Harris that has a record to run on in terms of our economy, in terms of lowering the costs of prescription drugs. Trump talked about it. Biden-Harris lowered the cost of insulin. Infrastructure week here in Jersey, as you are, the biggest infrastructure investments ever made in the history of our state in the New York, New Jersey region. Donald Trump had infrastructure week, but Biden-Harris actually got some investments done. This is about the future.
Senator, I have to correct you. I have to correct you. Donald Trump had 8 infrastructure weeks. He did not have 1. He had 8. What do you say to those who look at this incredible buzz around the vice president, around this campaign, who are wondering how it happened? Some are even doubting that this enthusiasm, this fundraising, some don't even believe it's real. What do you say about the excitement to them?
Well, look, I say, in God we trust, but everybody else bring me data. I look at the data points. I'm just coming from campaigning in Nevada, where they've had a tidal wave of people signing up to volunteer over these last 95 days of the campaign. In fact, they're having record-breaking people signing up to make phone calls, to knock on doors, to write postcards. I look at the money coming in. That's real dollars and cents that you can measure, and they have broken records, not just for Democratic presidential nominees or Republican nominees, all presidential nominees in all of time. They have created a record now for a one-week haul. This is an extraordinarily exciting time, and this momentum is going to continue. And Donald Trump doesn't know what to do, so he falls back on his old playbook when he started his last campaign, casting aspersions that were outrageous about saying that people who come across the border are rapists and murderers. And that made everybody want to talk about that as opposed to real policy. Donald Trump is going to continue his old-fashioned playbook of saying outrageous, divisive things to deflect from the core issues of middle-class families, which should unite us. What should we be talking about today? The fact that the United Auto Workers, my grandfather got out of poverty because of the UAW jobs. They have endorsed Kamala Harris, one of the most important working class unions that there are. These are the real issues and the building blocks that build for a winning campaign in places like Michigan. Donald Trump doesn't want to talk about that. He wants to divide us along racial lines, divide us along gender lines, as opposed to what we need to do as a country right now is forget the tribalism, forget the divisiveness, but unite as a nation around our common cause and common purpose.
Well, perhaps that's why he's chosen J.D. Vance, who shares in the spreading outrageous ideas and divisiveness. And I want to talk about the child tax credit, because Senator Schumer is putting the bipartisan child tax credit expansion up for a vote tomorrow. And there's actually some Senate Republicans who want to block this thing. I'm confused by it. You work in the Senate, so I need an explanation. J.D. Vance has made it very clear Republicans are the pro-family party, right? His whole brand is family, family, family. But on top of that, it seems like he might not even be able to cast a vote because he's going to be campaigning in Arizona tomorrow. Can you explain this to me? Pro-family and expanding the child tax credit should be hand in hand.
Yeah, under Biden, we got it for 1 year. We were one vote shy. One Republican could have joined us to extend the largest middle-class tax cut. Over 85% of New Jerseyans got this tax cut, the expansion of the child tax credit. It cut child poverty in our country in half and brought children below the poverty line above. And by the way, their outcomes explode when you get children above the poverty line in terms of lifetime earnings and other positive outcomes. If you are pro-family, you would be there to vote for this bipartisan bill. And I'll tell you more than that. Donald Trump did not have the kind of bipartisan successes that Biden and Harris have on the first gun legislation in over 20 years, Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, Bipartisan CHIPS Act. This is a presidency and a vice presidency have joined together to do positive things. And what frustrates me is that these pro-family folks won't join Democrats in pushing paid family leave, in pushing for maternal care. We have the highest maternal mortality rate, in pushing the kind of policies that strengthen families at the kitchen table, strengthen families who want to raise children. And we have got to start talking about those things as plainly as we have. And who is fighting for American families, who is fighting for safe childbirth, who is fighting for these kind of basic freedoms in our country, and who's making it more expensive for families, more difficult for families, harder to find affordable child care, harder to have paid family leave. And that's folks like J.D. Vance. Look at their voting records.